It was used then, but I actually published this in 1754. And this was a political cartoon in 1754 that we should unite as colonies for common defense in what would be known as the French and Indian War. Thus, many people, literacy rate in the colonies was very poor. I thought a visual cartoon would be good, and it was. So we went, the birth of that image really caught on and went on through to help us create a nation. The French and Indian War, the English government had no inclination to let the colonies have any kind of a militia or army. We will take care of the incursions. They sent General Braddock here down to Virginia. He arrived, started trying to acquire wagons to haul the supplies to follow the army up to the fork of the Ohio. He sent his officers out to commandeer wagons, wagoneers. They came back with about 12 of them, half of them were broken. I was requested to go to Virginia to meet with Braddock, which I did. I told Braddock, how many wagons do you need? He said 150. I said, well, let's go up to Lancaster. I can get you 150 wagons. I put an advertisement in my newspapers, and he came. When we arrived up there, there were certainly that many, and the Army moved forward with these wagons that were acquired in Pennsylvania. The wagoneers were worried about payment. I created a bond issue of guaranteed payment, and they wouldn't have to worry. It was an easy journey at about 4 or 5 miles a day with a walking army. So that is why we were so willing to do this. The war broke out. Of course, we all know what happened to the good general. He was soundly defeated, and that ended that. But yet the British Parliament was, of course, responsible for the cost of the war. So they began to tax us, and tax us, and tax us, until we had the Stamp Act, which every piece of paper, from puzzle books to newspapers, had to have a stamp tax on it. The colonists were furious about that. I tried to negotiate with the English that we could repeal this Stamp Act, because I saw the winds of war starting, and that's exactly what occurred. The war of the French over the period of years and the taxation to pay the war ended up, in retrospect, starting another war. So thus the American Revolution. The Boston Tea Party was the turning point. I was in London at the time trying to quell the unrest that the Parliament had with these savages in the colonies. One of the funny stories is the aristocracy in London, we were such savages that at a funeral we didn't even wear white gloves anymore. A gentleman would always wear gloves at a funeral. So I appeared before. A turning point for me was the cockpit. In the British castle, there was a room that Henry VIII created because he enjoyed cockfighting and wagering and drinking with his friends. This room later became a hall, which I appeared before members of Parliament and aristocracy to argue the case of let's try to negotiate something to not have a war. I dressed in a finely made blue suit. I went to the cockpit. I argued, but I didn't argue. I walked into the room. Every seat was completely filled. Nobody had any inclination to give me a seat. And Wedderburn, who was in charge of the council, viciously tore into my reason for being there, and they would hear none of it. The Boston Tea Party was enough that they could hear that they were not dealing with us anymore. We want our money. And the sad part that the Tea Party was, all that tea that went into the Boston Harbor, that was worth millions of dollars, was owned by British Parliament members. The reason was they bought the tea to bail out the East India Company that was near bankruptcy. So that tea just fell in the harbor, the money's gone. The East India Company eventually failed. And thus, here the winds of war growing pretty strong. Lexington and Concord occurred, and I was in London, been called back, arrived in Philadelphia, and we set up our Continental Congress and debated what to do. And we